In the immortal words of the great American philosopher Eric Eager, it's truly a priv tonight to bring you this week's edition of the Too Deep NFL podcast. Tom Brady, he retires again. Is he really done? Maybe we get into his legacy a little bit. Sean Payton to the Broncos. I mean, they're a contender now, right? Yeah, I mean, what could go wrong? Frank Reich gets the Panthers job. Should Steve Wilks have had that job? Demeco Ryans goes back to Houston. Why? The Colts are down to 2. Come on. Would you just hire Jeff Saturday already? Where's Eric Bieniemy in all this? Kellen Moore is already learning to Charger. I think that's cute. We'll see. What's the difference between Cowboyed and chargering? We're going to find out. Should the Eagles be favored in this Super Bowl 57? Early predictions on the game. Tyler Huntley is a Pro Bowler. WTF. We talk about it next year on the 2D podcast.
This is the Too Deep NFL podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the National Football League, breaking down the NFL like no one else can. Too Deep is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric is the senior VP of Research and Development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro is the host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Too Deep Podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
Thanks for joining us. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember you can be a part of the conversation in the chat room. We do the 2D podcast live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central. So if you want to be a part of it, you can comment, like we said, via the Twitch, the YouTube, the Facebook. Just join us in one of those methods. You can also catch the show via the Twitter, LinkedIn as well. So look for it. Come on. Google us, search us. You got this far on a podcast, for crying out loud. Got to be able to figure the rest of it out. Let's get started, gentlemen. Jeff, NFL Network, did they bring the NFL flag down to half-mast with the retirement of Tom Brady, and is this one actually going to stick?
Don't know if the flags are flying at half-mast, but I've given a 99.9% chance of it being real. And look, I know he retired last year and he came back like 2 weeks later. I feel like I think I look back at his goodbye to Tampa at the end of their season, the way he talked to the reporters there. I look at the way the season ended there for him. I look at the fact that he talked about a long time ago wanting to play until he was 45. Doesn't mean that he wouldn't change his mind. Doesn't mean that somebody's going to try to change his mind or won't try to change his mind. A lot of interesting jobs out there. We talked about the 49ers, especially yesterday on our Red Bowl and Gold podcast, as being a very appealing place for him to land if he wanted to do that. But, I think that going off what he put on social media, the body language, the facial expressions, it felt real to me. And I think that he does a podcast with Larry Fitzgerald. He's a smart guy. He's got a big career in Fox broadcasting when he now that he's done playing. Maybe that changes in a few months, but I think it's legit.
Eric, what do you think? Is this one stick?
Petro. Oh, maybe I can't. There was a graph that we tweeted out at Sumer Sports I used for my old podcast. My other podcast. I'm trying to. Oh, I can't put it up there. Anyway. The crazy thing about Brady is he had 3 Hall of Fame careers in one, right? And how many players you think about, like Ricky Henderson in baseball, Rod Woodson in football, I think had 2 Hall of Fame careers back to back. But 3, right? His 20s were a Hall of Fame career, his 30s were a Hall of Fame career, and you can make an argument his 40s were a Hall of Fame career. It's insane how many times, and when you look at like his WAR over time, it's like up then down for a little bit, then up again, and then down again, and then up again before this past season. And as Jeff said, and he's 100% right, like this season looked different. It looked like he just, didn't have the time to prepare or didn't prepare, right? Jeff knows that, people who played, the game know, like, it's like the preparation that you have to go through in the offseason just to make sure that your body is prepared to play this game is so immense and so long and grueling. The idea that, for him, it's probably like, do I really want to start in February, go all the way to June, working out every day to keep this thing going? It probably looked daunting to him. And after an offseason where he relented on that for a time, as you could imagine, and it didn't work out for him physically as much this year, he probably knew that it was curtains for him.
Yeah, I think he looked like a guy that was done. And I'll give him credit for not, okay, let's do it now. Let's bring everybody back into the big room and bring the family around and all that. He's like, okay, I kind of did that. I went back. We're not going to do that dog and pony show again. Although I said this today, somebody want to help me out as to where he was. Why did he appear to be like on the panhandle of Florida, the redneck Riviera, where people like me go to vacation? Like, did it not look like there were a bunch of high-rise condos where, like what happened to the big fancy house and all that? Like, was I the only one that was trying to figure out where the hell he was?
I thought he was in New York. It looked like he was in New York City to me.
Was it?
Maybe. I mean, his kid goes to school with a friend of mine's kid, so I thought it looked like, like a East River or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't take it that way. But again, I think this guy is very calculated in what he does. I think a lot of what he was trying to do was put his numbers into a place where they could never be touched. So I think that this past year was part of that. But I think when Rob Gronkowski didn't come back, that was a big turning point for him, because when you're 45 is still a very young age for most people. But when you're playing professional football and you're in a locker room with, a whole bunch of guys who were probably 23, 24, 25 years old, and you don't have somebody in there you can relate to, every day that you feel that. And I've known Tom Brady since he started playing as in New England, and remember him in the locker room back in those days. And I can tell you, this is a guy who loved being around his teammates. That was a big part of the fun for him, being one of the guys, being part of the team. And I have to imagine that this year especially, that you're looking around and you're saying, I don't know who these guys are. It's funny. Tony Romo. Someone told me a story about him when Dak Prescott started playing for the Cowboys, and it was just like when Prescott started playing, when Romo was hurt. A guy told me, Tony never had anybody over to his house to hang out until Dak Prescott started playing well. And all of a sudden, he was throwing barbecues and having people over because he was in a locker room where Dak Prescott was easily relating to everybody, and he was he was 30 something, mid 30s. And so I can imagine being a 45-year-old man, how you feel trying to come to work and not really connecting with the people you're working with.
Yeah.
I think that Tom Brady threw 1,452 passes the last 2 years, led the NFL in passing attempt. We talk about, Byron Leftwich's offense, which we thought, too many run plays, right? There were too many early down runs. Brady led the league in pass attempts both this year and last year. 1,452 pass attempts the last 2 years as a 45-year-old and a 44-year-old. And I think Jeff's right. I think kind of tried to, run up the score. And when you think about, somebody tweeted something out that Mahomes, in his current pace, it would have to be like 2036, 2035 before he caught Brady in passing yards and touchdowns. I think that's what he's thinking, right? He's just like, who's going to be diabolical enough to play as long as me and play as well as me for that long. And I think that he wants, he saw Brett Favre. Brett Favre played forever, right? And, Dan Marino had all the records, and Tarkenton, and all those guys eventually got caught. And Brady ultimately was like, I want to be the one that lasts forever. Whether or not he does is another story. But I think he's trying to run up the score here a little bit on everybody.
just as a follow-up, since you mentioned it, Mahomes doesn't have to play for as long because he's putting up, if you're talking about just the numbers, Chase, because
Right.
he's putting up bigger numbers. 18th at this point, at the same 6 years in that Tom Brady was, and Brady was 28, Mahomes is 27. Brady was 58 and 20, Mahomes is 64 and 16. Brady had 18,000 yards, Mahomes has over 24,000 yards. 62% completion for Brady, 66 for Mahomes, 123 touchdowns and 66 INTs for Brady. Mahomes 192 and 49. He is already, again, a year younger and 69 touchdowns ahead of Tom Brady's pace. So, I mean, it's going to take a long time. He's got a long way to go. I grant you that, but he's not going to have to play till he's 45 to catch him at this pace. And, can he keep that pace? I mean, that was the amazing thing about Brady is he was, still putting up so many numbers at the very end. Listen, he's the greatest winner of all time. We touched on this a little bit last night on our Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Just real quick, we'll close the book on Tom, maybe. With this, Jeff, I mean, what is the legacy? Greatest winner, greatest player, greatest quarterback, all of the above?
For me, he's the greatest winner in sports I've ever seen. I mean, over Michael Jordan, over Wayne Gretzky, whoever you want to throw in there, Muhammad Ali. I mean, I just think his will to win was just exceptional. He's not the greatest football player because it's hard for me to make a quarterback that, just because I think, for me, Lawrence Taylor is the greatest football player I ever saw in my lifetime. Just the impact he had on football, the way he changed things. Jim Brown would be number 2. I'd put Brady 3. He's the best quarterback we've ever seen. I think he'll be that for a long period of time. But yeah, I think that certainly, I was doing a radio show out of Detroit earlier today, and they played a soundbite from Mike Francesa, who had said that Brady wasn't the best regular season quarterback, that was Tom Brady, and he wasn't the best postseason quarterback, that was Joe Montana. He just played the longest, which I think I understand what he's saying, but there's something to be said for playing the longest. Like most quarterbacks, I mean, what you said about Mahomes is true. He's off to a great start, but most quarterbacks fade away around 40. It's like we've seen a lot of great quarterbacks from Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Aaron Rodgers is starting to go downhill a little bit. To be able to play to 45, like that's unheard of. And so I think I give him more credit for being able to do that. And I also give him credit for his best skill was his most underrated skill, which was his vision. He saw things that other people just couldn't see. And his ability to move 1 or 2 steps faster than everybody else, it was like Larry Bird in basketball. Like he wasn't the fastest guy, he wasn't the strongest guy, he wasn't the quickest guy, but he saw things faster than anybody else did, which allowed him to move faster. I think that's Tom Brady's legacy to me.
Eric, if you're done rearranging everything on your desk and knocking your microphone around, did you have anything you'd like to close out the legacy on Tom Brady with in this subject matter?
If you have to know, my wife got me coffee because I care so much about the show that I need to be up and at 'em.
It's just so much fun and so easy to fire zingers at you. And let me know when you want to. I also like, hours before we do the show. At any point, Jeff, did Eric go, hey, by the way, guys, I got a graphic. I want to put it up there. No, it's sitting down there. We're going to wing it and try it here in a minute. But,
I thought I was going to be able to surprise you because I know how to, but you're the host and I'm not, so I don't have the capabilities. It's literally sitting there in the StreamYard, but you have to be host. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. On-air production meeting.
you want me to add it?
No, I mean, look, Jeff said everything perfectly there. I mean, Tom Brady there's just so many things that he learned. And again, like I said, he had 3 Hall of Fame careers. He had the career of being the hey, just win, baby guy. Yeah, there we go. There's Tom Brady's EPA generated per play.
Is this his DNA? What am I
There's some closed captioning explaining what this is.
Yeah, is this Brady's DNA? What am I looking at here?
Yeah.
So this is Brady. So notice all the other dots are the other quarterbacks in the league. So Brady's dot is often near the top. Early in his career, he was kind of near the middle of the league, right? If you look at 2001, 2002, and then, by the time he got to 07, he was the best. That's 0.4 points added per play, which if you extrapolate it out over a whole season, that's 12.5 points per game. We talk about what a quarterback is worth to the point spread, 12.5 points per game, which is insane. And then he had the dip again, right, when he got hurt, but also when he came back. Then you had the ascension. Then you had the dip at the end of his New England career. Goes to Tampa, slays at Tampa, wins the championship, and then has the dip again. I mean, I think it's really cool. Not only is he just, again, 3 Hall of Fame careers in one, which I think is insane. And over that course of that time, as Jeff said, he learns things that make him stay ahead of the pack, despite the fact that his physical skills could atrophy. Thanks, Tina, by the way. I appreciate that. The chart was totally worth it, Eric. Thank you.
There you go. Yep, there it is. Tina.
Is that your sister?
Yeah.
Tina told me she was going to murder me if I went to the game Sunday, and then she spent the whole last show yesterday apologizing profusely.
Yeah, I like it. This is my favorite down here. Best game manager ever. Strong take there. The 2D podcast proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the entire KC area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, KC's nationally recognized full service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every single project comes with a written warranty. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call at 816-484-3338. Tell them you heard about them on the 2D podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Let's get to the coaching stuff because we do want to get to the little bit of a preview for the Super Bowl lying ahead. Sean Payton to the Broncos. It's all fixed. They're a contender now, Jeff. We know Eric's going to put a wagon's worth of money on the Broncos to win it all for next year. He's not. How much did Sean Payton fix the Broncos?
Look, I said, maybe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, this was the best job of the 5. And it was the best job because they have a good defense. They have good young players on offense. We saw Jerry Jeudy come around late in the year. Courtland Sutton is, one of the better receivers in this league. And Tim Patrick blew his knee out. Didn't get to play, but he's a good receiver. I'm of the belief that Russell Wilson is salvageable, that he certainly is on the decline, but that decline was rapidly aided by dysfunctional coaching by Nathaniel Hackett. And so if you're able to get him to a serviceable level, you should be able to compete for. I could easily see them being what the Jaguars were this year, a team that was poorly coached a year ago, and then all of a sudden a QB whispering coach shows up with an understanding of how to win, how to play offense, how to organize, and how to lead. And all of a sudden they're a 9-8, 10-17. That would not shock me in the least. And so, they've got to get Russell Wilson back to a place where he's playing quarterback with the realization that he's not a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen, and that you need a run game for him. You need to have him be able to play action. You need to be able to lose some weight, move around a little more effectively. But, Sean Payton, I sometimes feel like he's a little bit overblown with what he's done. I mean, people talk about him like he's the second coming of Vince Lombardi, but, he does no offense. I think he was doing good things with Jameis Winston before he left New Orleans. And I certainly feel like this was, they paid a heavy price for the draft picks. And I think George Payton, the GM, is probably not going to like the setup now because Sean Payton's going to have a lot more control. But that's the price you got to pay if you want to be able to play in this division and compete for a playoff spot.
Eric, Jeff said it's the best job. I don't know. I bet here's the part that I'm kind of curious about. What's he getting paid? I saw a couple things saying he was asking for 25 million.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sean McVay, I've seen estimated at like 15 to 18 million, which that shocked me that he was that high. That must have been why he dabbled in broadcasting last year, was to get that kind of pay increase. But if he is going to reset the market at $25 million, because the Broncos literally are going to not only spend $400,000 or $500,000 to replace a field for one game, they're going to pay whatever it takes for the top coach. Then are we looking, Eric, at a new arms race for coaches? And maybe we're going to finally see big markets be able to carry the day because they're going to end up paying 50, 60, 70, 80 million, $90 million for head coaches, and there are going to be other teams that are like, listen, we're the feeder system. We're going to pay 10, 12, 15 million.
Yeah, I mean, Payton, since 2009, this is also a graphic we tweeted out at Sumer Sports on Twitter, which since 2009, Sean Payton's Saints have at least pushed, but have gone over or pushed their season win total all but 2 years. So you're looking at, more than a decade where they've at least met or exceeded market expectations. I think that's a mark of a good coach and a guy that kind of gets more out of, the players. Obviously, you think about Marcus Colston, you think about Lance Moore, you think about Pierre Thomas, and Alvin Kamara was a 3rd-round pick, not a 1st-round pick. You go through the list. Jimmy Graham was a basketball player, and you look at all the things he did, right? When he was in New Orleans, his last year, they won 9 games out of 17 with Taysom Hill starting 5 games, Trevor Siemian starting 4 games, and Jameis starting the other games. That's a feat, right? You're talking, and when Denver, when they brought in Russell Wilson, they gave him they used resources on Wilson as if he was one of those elevator quarterbacks. He was able to take, the offensive line and make them better. He was able to take the wide receivers and make them better, the running backs and make them better, and he failed at it. And the only way you can get out of that is to use the resources that the league does not limit you, and that is that coach, right? And so they, the Waltons, one of the, one of, if not the most, wealthy families in America, and certainly the wealthiest family to own a team in America, like that's what they're going to do. That's how they're going to use their edge. Is Payton being overvalued here? I think so, right? I think that I would trade 2 first-round picks for a young Andy Reid, a young Bill Belichick. I do not think Sean Payton is on that level. I think that a 1 and kind of a 2-3, it's kind of change there. And then the money they're about to pay him is an overpay, but it's really the only out that this franchise has. That was the only reason that this coaching job was more attractive than the other ones, because everything else about this job sucks. Your division, I think with Kellen Moore coming to Los Angeles, I think the Chargers are going to be pretty damn good. We know the Chiefs are here to stay. And I think Vegas had a down year from a luck standpoint. It's not an attractive job other than the fact that you as Sean Payton, no one remembers Vince Lombardi in Washington. No one remembers George Seifert and the horribleness that happened in Carolina. No one remembers if Payton goes to Denver and sucks, no one's going to remember that, right? But if he goes to Denver and is amazing and elevates that franchise to a level and restores the storied nature of that franchise, he's a legend, right? So that for Sean Payton, it represented the best opportunity, but for everybody else, it didn't. And so that was what made this situation special.
I don't know, $229 million, already $4 million over the cap for this 23 season that's there. And they got to do, they obviously what they had was not good enough, unless it's just a schematic thing, which I'm open to hearing that'll be a lot of it. But the team's older than people realize, and they don't have any picks now to replenish some of that talent at the top. I actually think Houston is the most attractive job until you find out who you got to answer to. The ownership kills it. But lots of picks, lots of cap room. That should be the best one. We'll see if Demeco Ryans can do something with that. I mean, I know he played there, Jeff, but and I just mentioned cap room and picks, but is ownership make this a bad job? And are you banking on him to succeed?
Well, that was my worst job of the one, just because they fired the last 2 coaches after a year. And so I know he got a 6-year deal. I know he's a favorite son there because he played there. He's a great guy. I remember him as a player. Obviously a great track record as a defensive coordinator, but not the best time to show up with a high pick in the draft, right? If you're looking for a quarterback. I mean, there are some guys who have had great college records, but the best of the bunch is undersized and Bryce Young. You got CJ Stroud and Will Levis. I mean, it seems like you could get a dud in this class. And there are things upstairs that matter. They got rid of Jack Easterby, which is a big step forward for them. But there are people who would say, has Nick Caserio done enough with this roster in 2 years to feel enthusiastic about it? I would say he hasn't. I would say that even with Easterby gone, you still have to be concerned about an ownership that allowed him to stay as long as he did. And I feel like the AFC is, and that's one reason why I think Denver is more appealing. I think the AFC is realigning itself power-wise, and so I don't see them catching the Jaguars anytime soon. I don't see them being a good enough wild card team to compete with, I'm talking 2 years down the road here, to compete with what Denver has, what the Chargers would have, whatever's in the AFC North if the Dolphins stay strong. So I think that they're looking at an uphill battle. And again, I love the guy, but I think that job is really tainted in a lot of ways that I feel bad that a guy that nice and that accomplished has to put up with that.
How about it, Eric? Let's set ownership aside. You've talked a lot about how difficult that ownership is, and we know what they've done. Jeff's right, firing the coaches each of the last 2 years. But with the cap room and with the picks, I mean, you don't have to take a quarterback, right? There's other good talent. Maybe you grab more weapons. Maybe it's a wide receiver. Maybe it's a big defensive lineman, an edge rusher, somebody to kind of complete the team, and then you grab a veteran quarterback to play, as we've talked about, the Alex Smith role. And you wait and try to find your shot for the franchise quarterback on down the road. Do you expect Ryans to succeed?
No, I don't, and I'm the same way as Jeff. I think like he's a good coordinator. I worry about a few things. The 49ers have immense talent defensively, and we saw similar production out of a team coordinated by Robert Salah, who has had ups and downs at best. If you look at New York, and what were the problems with New York? New York didn't have a quarterback. New York built a great route. You look at the draft. It's Garrett Wilson, the Sauce Gardner, Bryce, the running back, Breece Hall, and like the team looks good, right? But you have that defensive-minded coach who is used to coaching an absolute, collection of great players defensively. You're like, and I also am wary of guys that come from San Francisco, because San Francisco is like the one team in the NFL that can have sustained like upper tier success. Not like, oh, we messed around and went 9-8, made the playoffs. But the Niners are like NFC Championship game participants like every year without a quarterback. And I look at those franchises, and this is the same thing like Mike McDaniel and Rand Carthon and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, guys that come from that building, and they're like, oh, quarterback's not, and I'm like, no, have you seen sustained success outside of San Francisco without a quarterback in this league? No. And so I get worried about just that mentality. And so I would be worried if he went in there and did not try CJ Stroud. And I think Stroud's the best quarterback in this class. So if he didn't go in and take Stroud, I would be worried, because it just to me signals a mentality that only really works in San Francisco and doesn't work anywhere else. And he does have a long-term deal, which is great. And I think Houston needs to legit buy into a coach and have some stability there. But there's also the fact that like Nick Caserio is kind of in a job-saving mode as a general manager. So how does that like sort of jive with a head coach that has a long time period? I just don't know if it's going to work there for a number of different reasons. And and we say the same thing about polls in Chicago. Like all this cap space and all the picks look great, but can a team pull it off in a short amount of time? I don't know.
Yeah. We get an African-American coach with Houston Texans, Jeff. We don't get one with Carolina Panthers. Frank Reich gets that job. Should Steve Wilks have had that job? Demeco Ryans, I think we'll get a quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over and try to win with defense and go 10-7 a couple of times and then be fired with disappointments on the offensive side of the ball. That's usually what happens with defensive coaches when they get hired. They went for the offensive guy in Carolina. Don't have the quarterback, but should Steve Wilks have been given this job instead of the way he finished?
I probably have more of a problem with it if it was, let's say, Nathaniel Hackett who got the job. I mean, I'm a big Frank Reich fan. I think he did a lot of good things when he was an assistant coach in Philadelphia. I think he did good things with the Colts. And I understand the need for David Tepper to find a coach who he thinks can develop a quarterback and get their offense going, because they actually have a pretty good defense too. and they've got some pieces down there to work with. I mean, they've obviously traded Christian McCaffrey, and Robbie Anderson was a train wreck at the end, but they've got some pieces in place there. And so, and be honest with you, the way they played under Wilks has got to be encouraging as well. If you're able to get a quarterback to come in there and bring some talent under center there. I understand that, but I understand the dilemma that Tepper was in, that you're going to take heat for not hiring a minority coach. But, you know, I've always said this about this particular topic, minority hiring, that nobody's owed anything anywhere. Like, the NFL is 32 small businesses all operating with their own philosophies about how they want to do things. And, you know, I just took a big dump on the Texans ownership, but they've also hired 3 straight black coaches. And so that should be, you know, noted in this process as well. So, you know, I feel bad for Steve Wilks. I like him a lot. And somebody made a comment about him in Arizona. That was a disastrous situation with Josh. You know, the quarterback was a mess. The team was a mess. They were rebuilding, and they decided they want to go with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, which became a mess in its own right. But I think that I understand why they took Frank Reich, and I respect them for it.
Yeah. How about you, Eric? They get it right in Carolina?
You know, Frank Reich is probably the right guy for this job. I thought he did a great job in Indianapolis, given, you know, everything he went, like, so for example, like, he hired guys like Matt Eberflus, who were supposed to come in with Josh McDaniel. And so he didn't always, like, the whole time that Frank Reich was in Indianapolis, he was always sort of scaffolding from another person's decisions. So, you know, it was Josh McDaniel, and then he has to take some of his assistants in, right? And like incorporating them and making them successful. Then he had Andrew Luck, and then Andrew Luck made his decision to retire. So then, you know, Reich had to deal with that. And like, he wasn't perfect, of course. He wanted Wentz, which was a bad decision on his part. And there was always, you know, this thing, but he kept the thing on the tracks, you know, fairly frequently. And, you know, you saw when Jeff Saturday actually got his turn at the plate after him, it was a nightmare. Like, it was garbage. Does that mean that Steve Wilks should have been passed over? I struggle here, because the history of interim coaches that get hired full time is not good, right? Like,
Yeah.
You know, you think about Leslie Frazier in Minnesota, you think about Jason Garrett in Dallas is probably the best one, and like, Jason Garrett sucked, you know. So I think that I off the top of my head, there may be other ones that happen, like Romeo Crennel in Kansas City.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that was just a nightmare, right? Like, you know, he gets the team up to play for 3 games at the end of 11, comes in 12, and they win 2 games, you know, like. And so I unfortunately, when it comes down to minority coaches, we often make these like rational arguments for why they don't get their job. And the rational arguments are reasonable, but ultimately it ends up looking terrible, because we still, like, it looks bad because it's an error that happens in addition to all the other errors we make in terms of hiring, you know, minority coaches and things like that. So I think in a vacuum, the Steve Wilks thing makes sense. But in the relative to what the league is already doing at that position, it looks bad, and it should look bad.
Yeah. But, you know, I know you're going to weigh in, Soren, but I'll say this too. I appreciate that at least David Tepper said why he did it. And he said, look, this league is about offense. The rules are about offense. Everything's going offense. I want an offensive head coach. He said that.
Yeah, and I can't fault that, because you know, I would hire I'd never hire a defensive coach. So you know, I think it's quite possible Demeco Ryans is the next Mike Tomlin. If Mike Tomlin was available, I'd hire him, but I'm not looking for prospects through the defensive coaching side. If I'm going to end up hiring a prospect, it would be an offensive coach. You know, we'll come back to Jeff Saturday here in a second, but where is Eric Bieniemy in all this? He is an offensive coach, right? Like, I mean, we've been round and round. We don't need to spend 20 minutes on it, because over the last couple of years, I think the amount of time that people spend on Eric Bieniemy has gone down, because I think people have just kind of settled on, all right, there's some flaws there. He cleaned up the flaws. It seems like he's getting a lot of name recognition for offensive coordinator, you know, which is, I think, something we all agreed. You know, we've said it a million times on this, that's what Lewis had to do when he left the Ravens.
Rivera.
Rivera had to do it. Marvin Lewis went from the Ravens to Washington for 1 year. People don't remember that, but he did turn that defense around. Then he got the Bengals job. That's what needs to happen here, isn't it? And at least we're hearing that in addition to, him being interviewed for the Colts early on.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to reach a point in this industry where if you've been out there too long, it's just like a house sitting on the real estate market for too long. Somebody's going to be like, what's wrong with it? Why is somebody not buying it? And I think Eric Bieniemy should be a head coach someplace. Even the Colorado job, and again, I mentioned that on this podcast a while back that, some people close to him said that wouldn't be a great fit for him because he doesn't want to deal with the NIL stuff and the transfer portal and all this stuff, new age college players. But he's got to go someplace where he can showcase himself. And that place isn't in Kansas City anymore. And so I think that it was nice that the Colts brought him in and talked to him, but there's just too many hot candidates out there now. I said it a couple of years ago that it wouldn't shock me if Mike Kafka was a head coach before Eric Bieniemy was, and now he's interviewing with the Cardinals, and he's got some shine on him because of what happened with Daniel Jones and the Giants, a big market. That's kind of how it works in this business, and so I feel bad for Eric, but I also understand that, and I think he understands this too, that it's not, things aren't always fair. And so his best shot to be a head coach was within the first 2 years of this team having the kind of success that they had with Mahomes and Reed. And once that didn't happen, it's just you don't want to be the face of why minority head coaches are unhappy with the NFL. And that's what he's become now. And he's got to change that.
I love the analogy.
Just hit the nail on the head, right? Like after all these guys get jobs because they generate something that's above expectation, right? Mike Kafka in New York, Daniel Jones is terrible for years, gets him to the playoffs, plays a great playoff game. Everybody's like, well, what the hell happened here, right? Brian Dable takes Josh Allen from a guy who can't hit the broadside of a barn to an MVP candidate. Oh, who's the guy here, right? And the problem with Bieniemy, again, I think, I've been privy to some information about how the interview with Indianapolis went, and I think, unfortunately, from what I can tell from the interview process, the guy, it's kind of in his head a little bit. I think, and it should be, this whole process has been incredibly unfair to him. And so, I think that there's an aspect of it's, something's got to change for it to stop spiraling and for him to kind of reorient himself. But the problem in Kansas City is that the opportunity for him to get the job was right after 18, when you go from 10th overall pick to MVP, and everybody's wondering who is the guy responsible for this. Now, Patrick Mahomes being the league MVP is kind of what we all expect to happen. So if the only thing that can happen to Bieniemy is us being like, what the hell happened this year? Last year's AFC title game where we're like, did they get into a fight? Do they gotta not get along? And it's we forget that Mahomes and the Chiefs offense is achieving heights that no one else can consistently do. It's all about expectation when we look at coordinators and exceeding those. And he did that 5 years ago, and we didn't let him have a job then. And now it's kind of it's a spiral that we can't get out of until he gets a job in Baltimore or something like that and does great work with Lamar.
I love the analogy that Jeff had about the house that's been on the real estate market too long. I think that's absolutely right. And what's the other thing we know when stuff leaks out, if there is interest in these teams with Eric Bieniemy as an offensive coordinator, what do we know about where it's coming from? It's coming from his agent, right? Yeah. That's who puts this information on the market. If you want to know, somebody stop me if they think I'm wrong here, where 80, 85, 90, 95% of all the news that's broken comes from the Schefters and all those things. It comes from agents. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to be a jerk, but that's who talks, right?
Well,
I mean, that's
directly the verb, the exact verbiage.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it comes from. And so, if his name is out there everywhere, whether it's a smokescreen and his name's not really out there, or he really is in demand, it's his agent putting it out there. Which I'll just leave you with this. Makes me wonder if he's been told, this is your last year. It's going to be a great year. Enjoy it because it's your last year here. Because Matt Nagy's name got mentioned in Tennessee, but we're not hearing that anywhere else, which makes me wonder how that's going to play out. I'm not so sure that he's not having to go find a job right now because the Chiefs are saying, hey, it's time. We're going to give you that push that you need. Andy Reid pushed Sean McDermott out the door his last year in Philadelphia.
Wow.
When I talked to people there, he pushed him out because he thought, you don't want to be around this. This is not going to go well. I'm hanging in here for one more year as kind of a favor to Lurie, but I'm going to send you out and get you going so you don't get this stink on you. And to me, I wonder, it's not the same thing. It's not collapsing in Kansas City, but giving Eric Bieniemy that push that he needs to go, listen, you got to go someplace else and get out from under my shadow. I wonder if that's what we're watching happen here from afar. Could the Colts just hire Jeff Saturday? I mean, I got about 90 seconds of patience in the subject. That's what's going to happen, right, Jeff?
It feels like it's trending in that direction, that he's hung around this long and they've kind of gone through their list, followed their protocols and, appeased everybody on the minority side of this. And, I will say that Ejiro Evero from the Broncos, who was coming for a second interview, is a very impressive dude. If you spend time talking to him, I know that Denver, again, was a mess. The defense wasn't, and he's a very sharp guy. He is as sharp as the Matt LaFleur's and the Kevin O'Connells and the Sean McVay. He's got a presence to him. So I'm not surprised that he's still in the competition there, but it does feel as if Jim Irsay has a very high opinion of Jeff Saturday. And I don't know why that is. Yeah. What's that? But yeah, exactly.
Emphasis on high.
Yeah, you can say that. I actually worked for the guy indirectly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it feels like that's where it's going, and it would be a bad move. But the fact that he's been in it this long, I suspect that's where they're going to go.
Yeah, Jeff Saturday in Indy. Eric, is that where you? That's where I think it lands. Do you agree?
I privy to, like, the reports that they had like a 7-hour interview are true. And I'm sorry, Petro, but if you had like a producer that was your interim producer for 2 months of your show, and then you felt that you had to interview them for 7 hours after, how ridiculous would that be? Like, if you've seen this guy like produce your show or gal produce your show, and then you're like, well, I mean, what are we doing here? Like, what is the benefit of Jeff Saturday other than, he might be cheap and he might be controllable, and you might be able to be that Jerry Jones type of guy who can control your franchise in ways that most owners don't get to do. I have no clue why this is happening. Maybe Ballard, is sensing a situation where if they bring a coach in that has some sort of oomph to him, that Ballard gets reduced, and maybe he's playing into this a little bit. But it makes zero sense, to me rationally.
Yeah. I listen, they're going a long way to cover their tracks from just giving Jeff Saturday the job and then try to circumnavigate the Rooney Rule. But I'm with Jeff. Evero was in with the Rams as well, so he's got some of that McVay magic dust around him as well, which owners seem to like as well. Kellen Moore to the Chargers. Cowboyed to chargering. I mean, could there be a better bridge between two franchises for out of the frying pan and into the fire? Like, does this work, Jeff?
I like the move. Look, I think that what the options were for the Chargers when they decided to get rid of Joe Lombardi, whatever it was, a couple of weeks ago now or 3 weeks ago, were not great. And so if you're saying Kellen Moore falls into your lap, and he's a guy who, no matter what you think of Dak Prescott, he took his game to a different level when he got that job as coordinator there. And I feel like he's going to bring in some elements, some philosophies that Justin Herbert really needs, his offense really needs, because they've been too pass heavy. They've been too reliant on an offense that needs an infusion of speed. And he's coached some great guys. I mean, you can't deny last year they had the top-ranked offense in the NFL. And so if you're Brandon Staley, you have to be excited about the potential of this combination. Again, it's going to be – they're in a difficult division, a difficult conference, but they cannot afford to waste the last couple of years Justin Herbert has on a rookie deal just by fooling around. They had to take a big swing. Kellen Moore is a big swing.
How about this hot take, Eric? If it doesn't work, they're all fired. If it does work, Staley's fired because the quarterback will want his coordinator at some point when it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, here's Kellen Moore's ranks in yards, total yards on offense. First in 2019, 14th in 2020. That was the year that Dak got injured. First in 2021, and 11th last year. If you look at points per game, 6th, 17th again in the injured year, 1st and 4th. Like, I think obviously, some of that is Mike McCarthy, but a lot of it is Kellen Moore. And I think that he, I did an algorithm, I made an algorithm that showed really highly for him. People got very offended by that. And I was like, have you looked at this offense when like Dak Prescott's healthy and how efficient it can be? And, I think we all know that Dak Prescott's a good quarterback with limitations. And I think more, I think that Herbert's more talented than Dak is. And so there's a really good chance that this could be a good situation. And to your point, if he blows up, it could be a Dirk Cutter, Lovie Smith situation where the offensive-minded, offensive coordinator gets the head coach position away from the defensive-minded guy because, I think Moore is probably pretty close to being a head coach. It just hasn't worked out so far because Dallas is kind of this, Dan Quinn, Mike McCarthy, Kellen Moore, like sort of group of alphas that like can't, and neither Quinn nor Moore has gotten a head coaching job as a result.
The folks at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving Kansas City, proud to sponsor the 2 Deep podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized, full-serving paving, pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since '94. You can find them online right now at GannAsphalt.com. Any problems with parking lots for your business, Gann Asphalt can handle them. GannAsphalt.com online or call 816-484-3338. Let's turn our attention to the Super Bowl, Jeff. Should the Eagles be favored?
Yeah. I mean, just coming out of those 2 games, the Chiefs were more beat up. The Eagles obviously put on a pretty impressive show defensively against a really good 49ers team. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, I'm not a gambler here. I don't know how the betting lines work, but it seems like it's a toss-up game. And when you have some of that fluctuation and injuries, I can see where you would say, all right, let's go with the Eagles for now. It might change as we go. And we're still, a week and a half away from the game. So I would imagine there might be some fluctuation at some point, but the Eagles are a good team and they have some elements. I think the thing that if you are a Chiefs fan, there are things that what would concern you is that the Eagles do some things very well that the Chiefs have problems with. Chiefs aren't great against mobile quarterbacks. I haven't seen a ton of mobile quarterbacks this year. They're not great when a defense can rush forward and get after the quarterback like this team can. They run the ball very effectively. James Bradbury covered Travis Kelce last year when he was with the Giants and shut him down. And you got the injuries. And so I think there are things that will be sorted out as we get closer to the game. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly the Eagles have proven themselves to be a very good team and they don't turn the ball over very much either. And so there are a lot of things that would suggest that slight favorite. I get it.
Gay, Snead on the defensive side of the ball. Eric, we're still waiting. Chiefs went dark today. That's not what they did in either one of their Super Bowl runs before. So to me, it seems like they're pushing the NFL envelope here on not having to say anything about their injuries. They've got those 2 on defense, Gay and Snead. They've got Juju Smith-Schuster. They've got Kadarius Toney. They've got all kinds of injuries here.
Did they go dark though?
Yes, they did.
I mean, didn't they give out an injury report that said if we practice, this is what the participation would have been?
Did they comment on any of them and have anything to say about what the injuries were? No, they didn't. Did they do the absolute honest to God bare minimum? They pushed the envelope on the injuries? Yes, they did. And so, because I'm going to tell you that the writers in this town, I'm in Kansas City for those that I know we got people literally listening all over the world. They're pissed. And there's a lot of people that feel like the rules are being violated as far as what they're supposed to do. It's not a popular time to run around complaining about the team that's in the Super Bowl in a town. So you're not going to hear it publicly, but they're frustrated because they're trying to write stories and give coverage to the team, and they're not getting the access that they got in the past and that the other teams usually give. That all being said, is that the reason? Is this the line like, hey, till we get more context of what these injuries are, Travis Kelce's back. The line is protecting itself by making Philadelphia the lead. And if we see this team, everybody out at practice, that thing's going to move pretty quick.
I don't think so. I would be surprised if this thing closed 3 or greater on either side, much like the Bengals Chiefs game where, we talked about this, like, and Chiefs plus 2.5 to Chiefs minus 2.5 is about 10%, which isn't insignificant. It's a lot, but it's not, you would get more value if the Chiefs went from minus 2.5 to minus 3.5, just because so many games land on 3. The one interesting thing to look at in this market is the total. The total opened at 50, got down to 49.5, and now is at 51. And that was the thing that when you looked at, and the game went under the other day, but the sneaky part to look at the Mahomes injury last week was that total getting to 46, right? When all the money was coming in on the Bengals, it closes at 48. That was the signal that the Chiefs are going to be okay offensively in the minds of the people that put money on the game. This total is up to 51. If it gets to 51.5, that's a significant move because a lot of NFL games, you're talking about 27-24, right? A lot of games, are 51. So it is trending that way, that at least the markets are looking at, Smith-Schuster at least being healthy enough to play, possibly one of Tony and Hardman. But as far as the spread's concerned, like the difference between the Chiefs being favored by a point and not favored and dogs by a point or 1.5 is very minuscule. So to Jeff's point, I agree with Jeff. I don't have a problem with the Eagles being favored here. I think they're good. I think you can make a very good case that the Chiefs should be favored, but right now, like, the market isn't painting the Eagles as like, they're basically saying Eagles 53%, Eagles 52%, and that's perfectly within reason for me.
How about this? I'm going to read you off the list of quarterbacks that started against the Philadelphia Eagles. And there, we kind of touched on this last time. I didn't have the list. I have the list. Thanks to my buddy Curtis Siebel to cook this up. Here's who played against the Eagles: Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence, or he got good this year, Kyler Murray, Cooper Rush, Kenny Pickett, Davis Mills, Tyler Heineke, what's left of Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers.
Soren, it's Taylor Heineke. You have mangled his name on every single time you've done this.
What did I say?
Tyler Heineke.
When he gets better, I'll get it right.
Every single time you've done this, I almost gut laughed on air today because it was like the third time that you did, like, and I get it. Like, I get it. Start a playoff game and I'll get your name right. I get the bit, but it's.
I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I mean, like, it's just gonna sound like when he comes into the game is being facilitated. It's not because it's the plan,
right?
Okay, so I'm sorry if I haven't dug deep in the pronunciation of Taylor Heineke. Okay, Taylor Heineke. What's left of Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers in a terrible year who hung 30.
Actually, the Colts game, that game was started, I believe, by was it Sam Ellinger? Or was it
Saturday there?
Oh, Matt Ryan started the game for the Colts.
Saturday was there. Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers, who hung 33 on the vaunted Eagles defense. Ryan Tannehill, all beat to hell. Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Dak Prescott, who hung 40 and beat the Eagles. Andy Dalton, Davis Webb, Daniel Jones, Brock Purdy, who handed off to Josh Johnson.
Is that Davis Mills, you mean?
What did I say?
Davis Webb starting would be quite the feat.
No, Davis Webb started for the Giants because they were locked into their spot, and so they sat Daniel Jones and Davis Webb started. That's from Pro Football Reference.
Oh, okay.
Soren's basically making the argument they ducked Daniel Jones.
Well, listen, I'm just saying that's not an impressive list.
No.
Right. And Eric had the stat that according to the power rankings, The Eagles' schedule was 31st in the league. And I bring it up because, like, the big subject is the big mirror, Jeff, is that this game's going to go down the way the Bucs game went down with the 70 sack Eagles defensive front just working over Patrick, poor little Patrick Mahomes. The line's healthier, but my point is this, and Eric's done these studies. The quarterback controls how often you're sacked as much or more than the offensive line does. That array of quarterbacks sucks. They had, how many sacks the Eagles had with Hassan Reddick being the only appreciable difference on their pass rush? You know how many sacks they had the year before?
The Eagles?
Yeah.
How many?
28. They went from 28 to 70.
So you're saying that these sacks have more to do with the quarterbacks they're playing and not the offensive lines they're going up against?
I'm saying this team was not really anywhere near the Bears teams that they were chasing for the sack record. I mean,
70 sacks is a lot of sacks.
It is a lot of sacks. And Hassan Reddick makes a big difference, just like Chris Jones does, right? Like Chris Jones, when you have a guy that you got to go focus on, it makes everybody else's job easier. They're definitely better than they were last year. I'm just saying that, like, this narrative that there's just no way that, boy, that ball better be coming out in 2 seconds because you can't block this front, I think is a little bit erroneous when you have Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott in a bad year for both guys, lighting them up.
Well, I would say this. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a big part of their defense, and he got hurt in that Green Bay game, and he didn't play in that Dallas game. Like, he is one of the best safeties in the league. He was tied for the league in interceptions. He's a big part of what they do in their secondary. And, again, I think the Chiefs have a great shot at winning the game, but we've done this all year long. I don't remember anybody giving flowers to Orlando Brown Jr. or Andrew Wiley on this podcast or in the comment section. So that's where I think the defensive line for the Eagles has a chance to make hay. If I'm betting Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham against those two guys, I'm going with the guys in green.
Well, and that was the point when Orlando Brown started having the great PFF grade. It was when he was going against like Houston's edge players and like all these kind of crappy players on the opposite side. So, you could go both ways on the schedule stuff, to Jeff's point, which is, I think, correct. By the way, to the listeners in the comment section, did you guys jot that down? Jeff did say the Chiefs have a great chance to win this game.
They never listen when I pick the Chiefs, which is probably happened like 80% of the time on this show.
Yes.
Exactly. Like that's why I reset it, because if it came from a familiar voice like mine, maybe they'll register with them. But Jeff did say the Chiefs have a good chance of winning this game. I just want to make sure that it's jotted down by the folks in the gallery.
They won't jot it down.
Okay, but I think the other part is last season the Eagles with Jonathan Gannon had one of the least imaginative schemes in football, and when you add and that was because their talent defensively was not good at all. Linebackers, they were starting like Eric Wilson and like guys that really had Davion Taylor, guys who really didn't have a pot to piss in the NFL. To your point, Jeff, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury coming in and being a great corner for them right off of the New York Giants. They had a really difficult time stopping the run mid-season, so they went and got Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh to play in the middle along with Jordan Davis. Like, this team has depth on defensive line that is scary. But defense is a hard thing to analyze, because defense, to your point, Soren, is very much the other side of the offense as you play. And so if the Chiefs are healthy on offense, I think that they'll give the Eagles defense a run for their money, unlike in 2020 when they placed the Bucs.
Do you have an early side, Jeff, or anything that you think it's going to be key, or what you're watching for here over the next week and a half before this game goes?
The injuries are huge. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, again, I don't know how the markets figure this stuff out, but yeah, if Juju Smith-Schuster is compromised and Kadarius Toney is not out there and McCall Hardman aren't out there, those are big losses in a game like this. They have to be at full strength to be able to match up with the Eagles defensively. And certainly you want to know where Jalen Hurts is at with his own shoulder. You want to know where Mahomes is going to be at health-wise. I don't think either one of those guys will be at 100%. So that'll be a factor in the game. But it's an intriguing game to try to make sense of. And I was doing it earlier today, looking at, you're trying to find, as you mentioned, the Bucks game. You're trying to find games that seem similar. You're trying to find matchups. You're looking at the schedule and trying to figure out, okay, what's real and what's not. How much does last week's, play with the Eagles going against backup quarterbacks, does that recency bias matter? Does the Chiefs defense going against the Bengals beat up offensive line, how much does that affect what you see? I think it's easier to have more clarity about who can win this game after they get to Arizona and who's healthy. But yeah, right now I think it's the toss up.
Eric, thoughts here as we look a little bit out?
Well, here's what I would have bet so far. By the way, if you want to look at what I would bet, I am on TikTok and I do put TikTok picks. I know that makes me the millennial of the group, but here's what I like so far in the game. I like Jody Fortson 60-1 first touchdown scorer. That is by far the best bet on the entire board. All of your Kansas all of our Kansas listeners take advantage of that. I like under in the game. So the market hates under, but I like under 51. To me, there's a lot of different ways this game goes under. I also like Jalen Hurts under passing yards. I like Jerick McKinnon under rushing yards. And I like Isaiah Pacheco under rushing yards. And Patrick Mahomes under rushing yards for obvious reasons.
What's the number on Mahomes rushing yards?
18.5.
I'll take over. I'm all about the over on his rushing yards. 100%. Absolutely.
But Jody Fortson 60-1 to be the first touchdown scorer is an absolute steal for folks who want to bet that, who want to take a couple dollars and make $100.
I like it. I think it actually is. Yeah, I think it actually is.
When's the last time he caught a pass?
It's probably a touchdown when he did.
But that's why the price is so good, Jeff. He's out there in the red zone, and it just takes one, right?
Yeah. Just takes one. All right, let's close with this. And, of course, we'll have a couple more podcasts next week before we get to the game. We'll really dive into the matchups. We'll get more news on the injuries. We'll see what's going on with some of the storylines. You guys will be down in Arizona at that time next week. Tyler Huntley is a Pro Bowler. Why? What are we doing?
What are we doing?
Guys, come on.
Yeah. It's that if that's not the rock bottom for the Pro Bowl, I don't know what is. That you're just grabbing guys off rosters now and saying, come out to Vegas and hang out and we'll put a nice shine on you and you'll get to say you're a Pro Bowl in the media guide next year. Yeah, I've lobbied to just say, hey, it's okay to say, here's your all-pro team, here's your MVP, your awards, and be done with the season. It's just not worth it to try to do. The players clearly don't want to be involved in this. And if you're going to these depths to get players there, then you don't really have an all-star game anybody wants to pay attention to.
Eric, can you believe the Mannings are lending their name to this farce?
Yeah. the money, right? Like, these are generational bag chasers, right? Like, of course they're doing it.
Have you
seen Eli's heel turn since he retired? Like, the guy's hilarious. Like, I mean, they seen how and I like Pat McAfee. I think he's funny. Pat McAfee is a clown every single day for 3 hours and FanDuel paid him $30 million. Like, this is the era we live in. God help us all.
Honestly, I get that. I get people chasing the check. We don't all chase the check, per se. Although for $30 million, I'd probably do whatever you wanted me to do for that kind of cash.
But note of that, by the way.
But the Mannings have hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, enough is enough. It's the league. It's the NFL. This is a farce.
Yeah,
this is a farce, and the NFL's in it. I don't know. It's frustrating.
I think it's bad that there are incentives and there are algorithms. If you look at Pro Football Reference, Hall of Fame tracker and stuff, they're dependent upon Pro Bowls, and the Pro Bowl has been basically a joke for 15 years. That's my biggest problem is that there are, you're being judged on these things, and they're Mitchell Schwartz made 0 Pro Bowls somehow out of all of this nonsense. He makes 0 of them, and I feel like it either matters or it doesn't, and we know that it doesn't matter, but in a lot of circles it does.
They're better off having them just come to the Super Bowl, do like some kind of function during the weekend, let them sign autographs and be done with it. It's just not. Who watches this stuff?
I know. I don't get. I might check out the skills competition.
I bet on these All-Star games.
Or
I did when I bet.
Stop. Just stop.
That's more a statement about you than the game itself.
I agree. I like the Mannings. I just don't understand why they're doing this. I mean, like have some. You don't have to do this. And this one, I'll say this: I don't dislike Pat McAfee, not at all. I dislike Aaron Rodgers on Pat McAfee. Like that's what I don't get. You're missing when you hear me rail on Pat McAfee. What you're hearing, what you think you're hearing, is I'm not railing on Pat McAfee. I'm railing on Aaron Rodgers on Pat McAfee when he goes on there and lays on the couch and then bears his soul to everybody. I get what's going on. Pat McAfee's a talent. Wrestling, college game day. Listen, go make that money. I'm hoping someday it trickles down to us. It's as simple as that. All right, boys, that's going to do it. We'll be back at a Tuesday with our Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Wednesday, a week from tonight, we will have our Two Deep podcast. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, my name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB, saying thank you very much for joining us on Two Deep.